The command tore through the desert air like a whip. Remove her weapon. Now. 5 instructors closed in, boots grinding into the sand. For weeks they'd mocked her, dismissed her, called her the mistake that should have never been allowed here. But in the next 40 seconds, everything they thought they knew about power, about control, would collapse. And Sophia Marlowe, the quiet woman they had ridiculed, would rise into something terrifying. That Tuesday morning began with the metallic groan of a transport convoy as it rolled to a stop at Fort Meridian. Dust clouds swirled in the scorching air, sticking to the sweat of 17 nervous recruits inside the armored buses. For most, this was the moment that would decide their military future. They stared through grimy windows at a facility that looked less like a training camp and more like a fortress carved out of the desert itself. Scars in the sand told the story of decades. Obstacle courses torn apart by blood, sweat, and failure. Towers bristled with surveillance tech. Cameras blinked, watching everything with the cold precision of machines. This was no place for weakness. But as the new candidates lined up outside, even the hardened checkpoint guards faltered. Their eyes flickered toward one figure that simply didn't belong. A woman, middle-aged, carrying a plain duffel bag like it held her whole life. Sophia Marlowe looked nothing like a soldier. Her auburn hair was streaked with silver, her hands calloused not from weapons, but from years of fixing, repairing, building. Her posture was calm, respectful, but lacked the razor-sharp stiffness of the others. Her clothes were civilian practical, the kind of outfit you'd expect to see in a hardware store, not on a battlefield. She didn't rush. She didn't fidget. She walked as though time itself bent to her pace. The younger recruits stole glances at her, some curious, some openly amused, others keeping a protective distance, as if her mere presence could contaminate their chances of survival. Inside the administrative wing, Commander Emma Vega studied the file that sat on her desk like a loaded gun. 7 pages. That was it. No medals. No combat records. No glowing recommendations. Just a bare-bones summary. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood in 2001, followed by years of administrative assignments. The words were so vague they might as well have been written in smoke. Emma had read thousands of files in her 15 years at Fort Meridian. She'd seen soldiers with classified missions erased from public record. But this was different. Sophia's file carried a note buried deep in its security section. Previous clearance levels archived under executive authorization. Access restricted pending command review. Emma's fingers tightened around the paper. Clearance levels that didn't officially exist. That wasn't a mission. That was erasure. She leaned back uneasy. "Who the hell are you?" she whispered under her breath. Later, footage from the checkpoint only deepened her unease. She replayed the video 3 times. Every other recruit entered the base wide-eyed, scanning the environment like tourists. Sophia was different. Her gaze was surgical. She noted exits, counted guards, calculated sight lines. She didn't look around. She processed, as if her life had once depended on cataloging every detail. And then there was the most chilling detail of all, her emergency contact section. Empty. Not forgotten, not overlooked. Erased. Emma had handled files from operatives whose very existence was buried in secrecy. But never like this. People without emergency contacts weren't forgotten. They were disappeared. That afternoon, the recruits gathered for their first briefing in the climate-controlled auditorium, the air conditioning straining against the desert heat. Sophia sat quietly among them, listening, blending, her eyes calm but unreadable. Emma found herself staring at her again. The stillness of this woman reminded her of something primal. Photographs of wolves in the snow. Silent. Waiting. Always watching. The wolves didn't need to announce themselves. Their presence was enough. By evening, whispers had already spread across the barracks. "Did you see her? She's too old. She doesn't belong here." And yet, for every mocking laugh, there was someone unsettled. Someone who couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia Marlowe wasn't lost at all. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. But no one truly understood. Not yet. Not the recruits who laughed behind her back. Not the instructors sharpening their contempt like knives. Not even Commander Vega, whose instincts screamed that something about this woman didn't fit. The truth of Sophia Marlowe's past lay buried in shadows deeper than anyone at Fort Meridian dared to explore. And soon, far sooner than they expected, that truth would erupt into the open, leaving scars no one could ever forget. And here's where I leave you with a question. If you saw someone like Sophia, quiet, older, underestimated, would you dismiss them as weak? Or would you wonder what kind of storms they've already survived? The desert sun beat down on the training field like a hammer, baking the sand until it shimmered in waves of molten light. 17 recruits stood in formation, their shadows stretched long and thin across the ground. Some were stiff with nerves, others already brimming with cocky energy. But at the center of them all stood Sophia Marlowe, quiet, unshaken, her face unreadable, as though the heat couldn't touch her. And then came Sergeant Robert Hayes. His presence arrived before his voice did. A broad-shouldered man with scars etched deep into his skin, the kind that told stories nobody dared ask about. His gaze cut through people like a blade, stripping away pretenses in seconds. He carried himself the way only men who had survived war zones did, not with swagger, but with the brutal gravity of someone who had walked through hell and come back hungrier. Hayes stopped, scanning the recruits the way a butcher sizes up livestock. His boots ground into the sand as he moved, and his voice, when it came, was thunder. Well, he paused when his eyes landed on Sophia. A smirk spread slowly across his face, the kind of cruel grin predators wear before they pounce. Looks like somebody's mother wandered in on the way to her book club meeting. The recruits chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. The sound died quickly, but the damage had been done. The mockery hung in the air, sharp and lingering. Sophia didn't flinch. She didn't smile, didn't frown, didn't even blink at the insult. She simply stood there steady, as if Hayes's words had dissolved into the wind before they could reach her. And that unnerved him more than 1,000 angry retorts ever could. The first exercise was weapons familiarization. Each recruit was handed an M4 carbine. The task was simple: strip it, clean it, reassemble it, within the time that separated soldiers from amateurs. Around her, recruits fumbled. Metal clattered to the ground. Fingers shook with nervous haste. Curses filled the hot air as small parts disappeared into the sand. Sophia approached her weapon differently. She cradled it with cautious hands, her brow furrowed like she was reading invisible instructions. Her movements seemed clumsy, deliberate, even hesitant. But one recruit, Private Michael Emerson, saw what others didn't. Michael had grown up in chaos, one of 7 siblings in a house where you survived by noticing what others missed. And what he noticed about Sophia chilled him. Her mistakes weren't mistakes at all. Every motion of her hands, every placement of each part was efficient, automatic, the kind of muscle memory that only came from years of repetition. Her hesitation wasn't ignorance. It was theater. When the weapon snapped back together in her hands with machine-like precision, Michael's pulse quickened. She held the rifle as if it were an extension of her body. Natural, effortless. But Hayes didn't notice. Or perhaps he refused to. Pathetic, Hayes sneered. Even a half-blind rookie could have done better. His words struck the air like a whip. Sophia merely nodded. Yes, Sergeant. Neutral. Empty. Like smoke slipping through fingers. The days dragged on, and Hayes sharpened his cruelty with every session. During obstacle courses, he lingered near Sophia, waiting for her to stumble so he could pounce with venom-laced remarks. During sprints, he barked at her to keep up, mocking her age with every breath. During drills, he hovered close, whispering failures into her ear loud enough for others to hear. Most recruits cracked under that kind of relentless pressure. They cursed. They argued. Some broke down entirely. But Sophia? Every insult, every shove, every attempt to humiliate her, met only with the same calm replies. Yes, Sergeant. Understood, Sergeant. No anger. No shame. No visible weakness. And that neutrality, that refusal to give him anything to grip onto, was driving Hayes mad. But Michael saw more. During long runs, when younger recruits collapsed in the sand gasping for air, Sophia kept moving. Not fast, not flashy, but steady. Her pace was mechanical, her breathing perfectly controlled. 7 minutes, 45 seconds a mile. Every mile, without fail. During drills, her eyes flicked across the terrain, mapping exits, obstacles, threats, not like a student learning, but like a veteran remembering. And in combat practice, when paired against larger, stronger recruits, Sophia's movements were subtle. Too subtle. She threw them using by-the-book techniques, but Michael noticed the small details, the weight shifts, the precision hand placements, that turned clumsy throws into effortless takedowns. She wasn't learning these moves. She was hiding inside them. The shooting range revealed the most dangerous glimpse of all. Targets lined the desert field. Shots cracked through the air as recruits fired in nervous bursts. Some hit paper. Most didn't. Hayes prowled behind them, ready to humiliate anyone who missed. When Sophia raised her rifle, her stance was perfect, textbook, like she had memorized it from a manual. Too perfect. She fired slowly, deliberately, each shot looking strained and awkward. But when the ceasefire was called and the targets reeled back, Hayes's smirk faltered. Her bullseye wasn't peppered with 5 holes. It had 1. 5 rounds through the exact same spot. The range instructor, a grizzled man named Sullivan, stared pale-faced at the paper in his hand. He had only seen precision like this from shooters whose names were still whispered in classified circles. But Hayes? He scoffed. Beginner's luck. And with that, he turned away, blind to the storm building in front of him. By the 4th week, Hayes's cruelty reached a boiling point. He called it the reality check drill, a brutal assessment designed to separate warriors from pretenders. Usually, it was 3-on-1. Almost impossible, but survivable. Hayes smirked as he changed the rules. 5 attackers, he announced. Against her. The crowd murmured, shocked. 5-on-1 wasn't training. It was execution. Sophia stood in the circle, her hands at her sides. And for the first time since stepping foot in Fort Meridian, she smiled. A small smile. Almost imperceptible. But it sent a ripple of unease through the recruits watching. Michael's heart thudded hard in his chest. Something primal screamed inside him. This isn't going to go the way Hayes thinks. And as the desert sun began to rise on the morning of the drill, silence fell across the training ground. Recruits, instructors, even medical staff gathered to watch. 5 elite soldiers stretched at one end, smirking, ready to destroy the civilian imposter. And at the other end stood Sophia Marlowe, rolling up her sleeves, revealing scars across her arms. Bullet wounds, shrapnel tears, surgical lines. Commander Emma Vega, watching from the edge, froze when she saw them. She had only ever seen scars like those on soldiers from units that officially did not exist. The whistle gleamed in Hayes's hand. The crowd held its breath. And Sophia raised her eyes, calm and unblinking, and said in a voice that seemed to echo across the desert, "Sergeant, when this is over, will you finally admit you never knew what you were looking at? The whistle is about to blow. 5 trained killers are ready to strike. But Sophia Marlowe is done hiding." The desert had never been so quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause, as though the earth itself wanted to witness what was about to happen. The training ground stretched out like an arena of sand and silence, circled by soldiers, instructors, and medics who had drifted here under the pretense of observation. But really, they came for blood. At one end, 5 instructors, the best Fort Meridian had to offer. At the other, a woman who looked like she belonged in a grocery store aisle, not in a combat pit. And yet, as Sophia Marlowe rolled her sleeves to her elbows, a shiver rippled through the crowd. Her forearms were a map of violence. Scars crisscrossed her skin, surgical lines, jagged tears, round healed wounds that could only come from bullets. Marks you didn't collect in training. Marks you collected in places the government didn't put on maps. For the first time, the smirk slipped from Sergeant Hayes's face. Just for a heartbeat. Then he lifted his whistle, pretending not to care. Commander Emma Vega leaned forward against the railing, her knuckles white. She had seen scars like those before, and they only belonged to one kind of person, operatives from programs that didn't officially exist. Ghosts in human skin. Michael Emerson, buried in the crowd of recruits, felt his heart hammer. His instinct screamed. This isn't going to be a fight. This is going to be revelation. Sophia stood at the center, arms loose, her breathing calm, her eyes steady. Standard rules, Hayes barked. No weapons. No strikes to the eyes or throat. Combat ends when one side yields or cannot continue. He let his words hang in the air, savoring the anticipation of the kill. Any last words, Caldwell? Sophia looked at him, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the silence. Just one. When this ends, will you finally admit you never knew what you were looking at? A murmur rolled through the crowd like distant thunder. Hayes blew the whistle. The 5 instructors launched forward in perfect synchrony. Davidson came straight on, 230 pounds of wrestling muscle, a human battering ram. Torres sprinted to the left, fast as lightning, his martial arts precision ready to strike. McKenna charged from the right, built like an industrial machine. Bradford stayed low, circling to flank. Novak hung back, his eyes calculating, waiting for the weakness to reveal itself. It should have been over in seconds. But Sophia wasn't there. Davidson's shoulder cut through empty air as Sophia shifted left by exactly 8 inches. Not retreating, redirecting. The movement was so smooth it looked like liquid finding a crack in stone. As he thundered past her, Sophia's fingertips brushed his neck. Just a touch. But it was placed with surgical precision. His legs buckled as if someone had unplugged him from reality. Davidson collapsed into the sand, his massive frame twitching helplessly, eyes wide with confusion. 28 seconds left. Torres and McKenna crashed toward her from opposite flanks. The trap was perfect. Close her in, overwhelm her. But Sophia vanished. Both men, expecting impact, found only each other. Physics did the rest. They collided with bone-crunching force, sprawling into the dust like broken machinery. Sophia was on them before the crowd even processed what had happened. Her movements weren't wild, weren't brutal, they were efficient. A heel snapped into Torres's knee, folding him like a paper doll. Her knuckles brushed McKenna's shoulder in a strike so precise it killed his right arm instantly, nerves screaming white-hot. 20 seconds left. Bradford lunged low, aiming to hook her legs. He was clever, tactical, trained to read people like open books. But this book was written in a language he had never studied. Sophia moved not around him, but above him, her elbow finding the base of his skull with the precision of a blueprint. Bradford dropped instantly, body limp, face buried in the sand. 15 seconds left. Only Novak remained. He had been cautious, waiting, watching. But his tactical brain struggled to process what his eyes had seen. His comrades, the strongest, the fastest, the most seasoned, scattered across the sand like children thrown from a storm. Sophia turned toward him. For the first time, she didn't hide it. Her stance changed. Her breathing shifted. Every scar, every movement, every ounce of her presence screamed truth. This wasn't a civilian. This wasn't a rookie. This was something else. Something forged in shadows. Novak's hands trembled as his survival instincts overrode his pride. He stepped back once, twice. Then his voice cracked in the silence. I yield. The crowd froze. No one clapped. No one breathed. Even the desert seemed stunned. Sophia exhaled softly, then bent to check each fallen man, her hands suddenly gentle. She pressed pressure points, adjusted limbs, ensured none were permanently harmed. The precision that had crippled them seconds before now worked like medicine. Michael Emerson felt his throat tighten. He had no doubt she could have killed them, every one of them, and no one would have been able to stop her. Then it started. A single sound, slow, deliberate clapping. Michael. His palms cracked the silence, each strike echoing louder. Then another recruit joined. And another. Until the entire training ground thundered with applause, the sound rolling like a storm across the desert. They weren't applauding a victory. They were bowing to a truth. The truth that for weeks they had been blind. That the woman they dismissed as weak was, in fact, the most dangerous person on this base. Sophia didn't bow, didn't smile, didn't bask in it. She picked up her towel and water bottle, rolled her sleeves back down, and walked away at the same steady pace she'd carried since day one. Except now everyone understood. That afternoon, Her transfer orders were processed in silence. Sophia Marlowe was no longer a candidate. She was an instructor, one whose real name would never be spoken, whose past would remain sealed behind classifications too deep to touch. But every soldier at Fort Meridian knew one thing. They had been in the presence of a ghost. And here's my question for you. When you look at someone, do you judge what's on the surface? Or do you wonder what storms they've already walked through? The training ground had fallen silent again, hours after the fight ended. But the silence wasn't peace. It was awe. It was fear. It was the kind of quiet that spreads when people realize they've seen something they were never supposed to see. By evening, the story had already mutated into legend. Recruits huddled in the barracks, their voices lowered to whispers, as if speaking too loudly might summon her. Did you see how fast she moved? Davidson went down like he'd been shot. No, it was worse. She touched him. Just touched. The laughter that had once followed Sophia Marlowe had vanished. In its place was a heavy, electric respect, the kind that bordered on fear. For some, she became an untouchable figure, proof that strength doesn't always come wrapped in youth and arrogance. For others, she became a nightmare, a reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters until it's too late. Commander Emma Vega didn't sleep that night. Sophia's scars replayed in her mind. The ease with which she dismantled 5 of Fort Meridian's finest haunted her. And more than anything, that tattoo. Faded but clear. 7 parallel lines. One crossed out. Emma had seen markings like that once before, in a classified briefing years ago, the kind where they locked you in a steel room, stripped you of your phone, and reminded you that if you repeated what you learned, your career would end in silence. The Shadow Division, a unit that didn't officially exist. Operatives buried so deep in secrecy that even their medical files required top clearance to access. Their mission was simple: solve problems the government couldn't admit existed. And if they died, they were erased. 7 operatives. 1 crossed out. Which meant Sophia Marlowe was supposed to be dead. Emma sat at her desk long past midnight, the file open in front of her, her hands trembling over the 7 empty pages. She wanted to look deeper, but she knew the risks. Files like this weren't redacted. They were designed to kill curiosity. Still, one question gnawed at her like a bladed bone. What happens to a ghost when it decides to come back? Meanwhile, Sophia's transfer was executed with quiet efficiency. There was no ceremony, no congratulations. Just a notice. Effective immediately, candidate Marlowe is reassigned to instructor status. Designation: Advanced Combat Specialist. Authorization: command level only. The recruits read it pinned to the bulletin board the next morning. No one dared comment. But their eyes told the story. Every one of them understood they were now being trained not by an instructor, but by a predator disguised as one. Michael Emerson watched her carefully as she passed them in the corridor, her expression unchanged, her pace steady. She didn't acknowledge the whispers, didn't revel in the silent reverence now surrounding her. She simply moved forward, the same way she had from the first day she arrived. Yet Michael couldn't shake the feeling. She was always measuring, always scanning, always preparing for something none of them could see. Sergeant Hayes, however, refused to bow to the legend. Humiliation burned in his chest, deeper than any wound. He replayed the fight in his mind 1,000 times, looking for excuses, for flaws, for any scrap of explanation that might restore his dominance. But there was none. Sophia had destroyed him without laying a finger on him. His authority, his reputation, his identity as the predator of Fort Meridian, all shattered in 40 seconds. And Hayes was not the kind of man to accept that defeat. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he muttered under his breath as he slammed his locker shut. "Because I'm not done with you, Marlowe." His eyes burned with something far more dangerous than contempt now: obsession. The following week, Sophia led her first session as an instructor. Her teaching style was unlike anything the recruits had experienced. She didn't bark orders. She didn't insult. She didn't waste words. Instead, she demonstrated. Slowly, calmly, efficiently, movements that seemed simple until you tried them. Then you realized every inch of her body was a weapon, every shift of weight deliberate, every strike designed to disable, not impress. She wasn't teaching them how to fight. She was teaching them how to end fights. Violence, she said quietly, as the recruits gathered around her, isn't about strength. It's about precision, efficiency, control. The moment you fight for pride, you've already lost. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. And in that silence, every recruit leaned closer, desperate to absorb her words. Michael noticed the way her eyes scanned the horizon between sentences. Always searching, always ready, as if teaching was just a cover, a distraction from the truth of why she was really here. That night, Emma Vega summoned her to the commander's office. The desert outside had fallen into darkness, the facility's lights glowing against the sand like lonely stars. Inside, the air was tense, heavy. "Sit," Emma ordered softly. Sophia obeyed, calm, composed. Emma studied her across the desk. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The silence stretched, deep and heavy, until finally Emma broke it. "You're not who they think you are." Sophia's eyes didn't flicker. Her breathing remained steady. She simply tilted her head slightly, as if waiting for Emma to finish. "I've seen your scars," Emma continued. "And I've seen that mark on your wrist. Tell me I'm wrong, Marlowe. Tell me you weren't part of the Shadow Division." Sophia didn't answer. Her silence was louder than denial. Emma leaned back, the leather of her chair creaking. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice sharp with frustration. "Why come back now? What are you running from?" For the first time, Sophia spoke more than a sentence. Her words were slow, deliberate, and cold. Not running. Waiting. The room seemed to grow colder. Emma's skin prickled. Waiting for what? Sophia's gaze finally shifted, her eyes locking onto Emma's with the weight of storms. "For them to find me." The silence that followed was suffocating, because Emma realized something she hadn't dared to imagine. If Sophia Marlowe, once a ghost, once presumed dead, was here at Fort Meridian, then someone, somewhere, had already started hunting. And now I leave you with this question. If someone erased every trace of you from the world, and you suddenly returned, would you still be yourself, or would you become something else entirely? Fort Meridian never slept. Even in the dead of night, its corridors hummed with generators, its watchtowers scanned the horizon, and its cameras blinked with unblinking eyes. But after Sophia Marlowe's fight, the base felt different. People moved more quietly. Conversations hushed when she passed. Respect and fear braided together, wrapping the facility in tension so thick it clung to the air. And yet Sophia herself remained unchanged. Same steady pace, same quiet composure, same silence that gave nothing away. But inside the commander's office, the silence had already cracked. Emma Vega sat in darkness, the only light spilling from her monitor as she broke a rule she had sworn never to touch. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling. She typed slowly, deliberately. "Shadow Division, archive request." The screen blinked. Then, a warning. "Access denied. Level red restriction." She exhaled, forcing her pulse to steady. Then she tried again, bypassing the usual channels, digging into the hidden tunnels of the system. This time, the screen flickered. A single file appeared. Small. Corrupted. Dangerous. Emma opened it. The document was almost empty, just fragments of sentences, redactions that blacked out entire pages. But one paragraph survived. Shadow Division. 7 operatives. Missions classified under Executive Black. Assigned to neutralize threats deemed unacknowledgeable. Operatives erased upon presumed death. Status, non-existent. And then, beneath it, Operative 7, codename, Wraith. Emma froze. The word chilled her blood. Wraith. A ghost. A phantom. A presence you could feel, but never catch. And under that codename was a photo. Blurred, grainy, but enough to see the face. Sophia Marlowe. Emma slammed the file shut, her heart pounding. She felt like she had just stared into something the world wasn't meant to see. The Shadow Division wasn't legend. It wasn't rumor. It was real. And Sophia, Wraith, had been one of them. But that raised a deeper, more terrifying question. If she was supposed to be dead, why was she here? Meanwhile, Sophia sat alone in the dim glow of her barracks room, her duffel bag at her feet. Inside lay no keepsakes, no comforts. Only tools, pieces of a life stripped of sentiment. Blades wrapped in cloth. A pistol disassembled into parts. Old, faded photographs burned at the edges. And beneath them, a single folded letter. Its paper worn, its ink faded. She unfolded it slowly, hand steady despite the weight it carried. The words were short, brutal, final. Wraith compromised. Operation terminated. Status, Kia. Her own death, written by someone who had never seen her body. Someone who had decided she was easier to erase than to acknowledge. Sophia stared at it without blinking. She had read it 100 times. 1,000. It was the only proof she had that once long ago, she had been buried by the very machine she served. And now she was here, not hiding, not running, waiting. The following morning, whispers filled the mess hall. A convoy had been spotted at the far perimeter. Unmarked vehicles. Blacked out windows. Men in suits, not uniforms. Rumors spread fast. Some said they were government inspectors. Others said intelligence officers. But the older veterans, the ones who had lived long enough to know the truth, whispered a different word. Cleaners. The kind of men who arrived when things needed to disappear. And every instinct told Emma Vega they hadn't come for inspection. They had come for Sophia. That night, Emma confronted her again. "Why are they here?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger she didn't fully understand. Sophia's eyes were calm, steady. "Because I didn't stay buried." Emma leaned forward across the desk. "Tell me the truth. Who are you?" Sophia was silent for a long time. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but sharp enough to slice through the air. "They trained me to be invisible, to slip into places that didn't exist, to end problems before anyone knew they'd begun. They erased my name, my family, my life. When the job was done, they buried me with the others. Ghosts are easier to control when no one believes they were real." Her gaze hardened, her scars catching the dim light. "But I lived. And now, the people who wrote me off as dead, they know it. They don't like loose ends." Emma swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" Sophia looked past her, out into the desert night, where the headlights of the unmarked convoy glowed faintly in the distance. "What happens now," she said softly, "is that the hunters have found their ghost." The base held its breath. Soldiers pretended not to notice the new shadows lurking in corners, the unfamiliar men walking the corridors with polite smiles and dead eyes. But Michael Emerson noticed. He always noticed. And he realized, with a sick feeling in his gut, that this wasn't over. The fight on the training ground had been only the beginning. The real war, the one Sophia had carried in her silence since the day she arrived, was about to break open. And Fort Meridian was standing directly in its path. Sophia sat alone again that night, the letter in her hands. The word status, Kia, stared back at her like an accusation. She folded it carefully, slid it back into the duffel, and whispered to the empty room. "You should have left me dead." The screen fades to black. Her story doesn't end here. It's only just begun. And I leave you with this. If the world erased you, your name, your past, every trace of your existence, and you were given a second chance to walk among the living, would you use it to start over? Or would you use it to settle the score?